Hey guys, in this video we are going to be covering everything it takes in checklist form to learn web development from the very beginning to the point that you can get a job and consider yourself a professional web developer. Now in the past I've done this in mind map style and I've included every possible thing you could learn and all the options that are out there and the nice things to know. But it was pretty confusing for new developers. It was very useful for experienced and professional developers, but it kind of confused and overwhelmed new developers. So in this video, I'm going to cover checklist form, just what it takes to learn web development, what course you should take, what path you should take, and what technologies you should learn in order to become a hireable professional web developer. And we're going to give you about as much time as it takes. Now I'm going to point out this link here at the bottom. This is the link to what I'm using in a more print-friendly form. And I'm also going to add many more links to that as I start building out videos against these to-dos, because I'm going to start building out a lot of videos afresh for 2022 with all the checklist items you see here. So let's get into it. You are starting web development. You want to become a professional software engineer, make the big bucks. What do I have to learn to not have people laugh at me in a job interview in the near future? So you basically have three phases you're going to go through. You're going to go through the 101 front-end fundamentals. You're going to go 102, which is where you become an intermediate front-end engineer or developer. And then you're going to learn advanced front-end. And at that point, you're pretty confident, hey, companies are looking for the skill set that you have. So let's get into 101. What are the things you need to learn? 101 web development is basically three skills. You're going to learn basic HTML, basic CSS, and your JavaScript fundamentals. But I've broken them down and given you a little more detail about what you should Google and what you should actually learn if you're learning these things. Of course, you're going to want to install a code editor first. You should use Visual Studio Code. That's from Microsoft. Visual Studio Code. It is super great, super popular. Tons of professionals use it. And of course, it's free, which is very nice. Everything we will do on here is free with the exception of where you host a web page when you're ready to actually publish it. So basic HTML is something you'll want to learn. It's really simple. You basically just learn tags and you learn about 20 tags. Then you're basically confident with basic HTML. You can build an ugly page. Think Craigslist. Craigslist is what you get when you code with HTML and use almost no CSS. The biggest hangup you're going to have here is HTML folder structure. How do you actually save your files in folders? And then how do you add links to link to those specific files in the right folders? This is where everybody seems to mess it up. Everybody seems to have a hard time getting this piece right of adding links and making sure those links go to the actual file or the actual web page you want them to go to. So that's going to be the trickiest thing when you're starting off. And then once you kind of have your basic tags down and a little bit of HTML, you're going to want to move right into basic CSS. When you're barely confident with HTML, learn HTML and CSS together. You're going to learn how to add CSS to your page using style tags and link tags and inline style attributes. And then you're going to learn how to create CSS rules. What is a CSS selector? How does the CSS selector work? And how can you change some basic properties? How can you change your font to red and your background page to blue, which would be a super ugly page, by the way. And then you want to get really good, and here's where a lot of people mess it up too. The next thing you want to do is get really good at drawing boxes on the screen with Flexbox mostly, and grid later on. But first, just Flexbox. Can you draw a layout with Flexbox? Any layout, right? A sidebar with a top header, or can you do like a top header and then 3 boxes in a row side by side and then 6 boxes side by side? If you learn how to draw boxes really well, you can become really good at building web pages quickly and easily. Because the most confusing part for people starting off is, how do I draw the boxes that hold all the little pictures and text and things? If you can draw the boxes well, then the things that go in the boxes are usually pretty easy. Because if you think about any design is just boxes with stuff in them, right? The header of a web page is just kind of a box at the top. And then inside of that, there's a logo and a navigation. And then the footer of a web page, it's just a box with links in it, right? So if you can learn how to draw boxes really well, then you're set up to do really well with CSS. Basically, you just want to learn how to draw boxes and then how to do the little tricks of the things that you put in there. Like, how do I show a profile image but make it a circle, not a square, when the image I'm using is a square? And how do I make the button like fade to blue when I hover over it, right? These are just little tricks. None of them are hard, but but you have to basically Google and find the trick that you want to do. Next up, you have like about a quarter of a day thing on learning what is a CSS reset and how do I use it. That's really, really easy checkbox to check off, but an important one. And then last, you basically just want to get to the point where you can build an entire website look from just a design or a mock-up. And it's very intimidating at first because you barely know how to put a button on the page. But eventually you learn, okay, a button is easy. Okay, a blue button is easy. Okay, a blue button that fades to red that has rounded corners and a shadow, that's also pretty easy. It's just these little tiny details that you learn and learn. And that's what you're going to be spending 2 to 6 weeks doing. How do I draw boxes? And how do I do all the little tricks of making things look certain ways? So that's HTML and basic CSS. At this point, you are going to move into JavaScript fundamentals. Now, JavaScript is a programming language, and this is the programming language that you use on the web. So you're going to learn programming basics. You're going to learn how to select. These are, by the way, all these things I'm typing are things that are really good Google searches. Querying DOM elements, working with DOM elements in JavaScript, right? I'm trying to give you the actual official names, even though it sounds confusing now. JavaScript event listeners. These are all the search phrases that you're going to search for when you're learning this stuff. You're basically going to say, how do I take code and interact with the web page, right? Like, so how do I say, when the user clicks on this button, I want to go out to Twitter and fetch their latest tweets and show them right there in the web page. Or when they hover over this button, how do I show other content on the page that didn't exist before they hovered on the button? This is what you use JavaScript for. You use JavaScript for programming, making actions and things on the page. And that's basically when you're going to learn JavaScript. Because it's programming, if you're new to programming concepts like variables, functions, and flow control, like if those words sound intimidating to you, they're not really scary concepts. But if they sound intimidating, that's what you're going to be learning. You're going to be learning programming basics. And that's why I put 2 to 6 weeks here. If you already kind of know programming with Python or something, you're going to be closer to that 2 weeks mark. But if programming is new to you, you're going to want to give yourself several weeks of buffer to look at what a variable is or a function and feel intimidated by the fact that that didn't make sense, and then learn it again. And oh, okay, after 3 or 4 days of learning functions over and over again, that makes perfect sense. I get it now. So that's where that buffer time is going to come in. And then lastly, there's a little bit of head knowledge that you'll want to learn. So I put about a day here. What is DNS? Like, you'll want to know what DNS is, how you register for a domain name. You want to learn what a web server or web host does for you. And when you point your domain name to a web host, what's actually happening? You don't really have to know this stuff, but you got to learn it at some point. This is a pretty good time to learn it. Like when I type somewebsite.com, how do I get a web page back? What actually happens? Like, you're going to spend years really understanding this stuff, but at this point, it's good to have a basic idea of what happens when I type in the name for a website. And then as a web developer, what part of that do I control? Kind of a hint here, you're going to register for a domain name. You're going to point that domain to a web host. And that web host has all your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files on it. So that web host, when you say mywebsite.com, it's going to give you back your main HTML page to all your users. So that's basically what you're going to be learning here. And at this point, how do you publish your website? Because you're going to want to publish your websites. There's some things you'll do a little later as you learn more technologies, but for now, the easiest thing is you're going to go with an HTML web host. HostGator has long been the easiest, one of the cheapest ways to set this up when you know what you know at the 101 level. It's also pretty inexpensive. It's like $3 to $5 a month, depending on how many months you pay for upfront. I have a video on how to do it. Start to finish, we have a website up in like 8 or 10 minutes. It's very, very simple. And there's also a few coupon codes that you can use that may or may not save you some money. I have an affiliate thing with HostGator, which I reached out to because I have always recommended them to people. So feel free to use those or not use those. This is 101. Should take you between 1 and 3 or so months to learn this. And once you get here, you're ready to move on to the intermediate level. Give yourself a pat on the back. Let's move on. Moving over to Web Dev 102, we're going to confront maybe what for many people is their biggest intimidation, and that's using the terminal. That's right, you're going to stop being afraid of it now. For lots of people, they see that plain white or plain black screen and just kind of freak out. What is this? How do I do it? Yeah, it's not that bad, guys. It's only scary if you've never used it. It's pretty simple. So you're just going to learn how to navigate around your computer, right? Just like you would on your computer. You'll click into folders, find the file you want. You're going to do that in the terminal. You've got to use it at some point, or people are just going to laugh at you on the interviews. Why not start learning it now so you're pretty comfortable with it when you go interviewing for jobs? So you're going to learn the basic terminal. You're going to learn how to get around and use it. And then you're going to learn how to install Node.js packages. Now, Node.js means two things. It means one, little things that help you out in your front-end development that you're going to install in your machine. And then Node.js also means a back-end programming language that you use to make web servers with. You are not going to do that latter part. You're going to do the first part. You're going to use Node.js to install things that help you code better. So we are going to learn how to install NPM packages, which is like one command. It's not hard to do. And then we're going to learn how to use other people's code, which is called a package, to help us code less and accomplish more. That's the whole point of it, right? A package is somebody wrote this cool thing that they find very useful, and they put it up on the internet for any coder to use. They call it a Node.js package, an NPM package. So you're going to learn how to install NPM packages to accomplish cool things on your own machine very easily. Then you're going to learn about version control. This is the other big new concept that's going to happen in this section. Now, I only put 1 to 2 weeks because it doesn't take very long to learn version control. But basically, version control is how we handle a bunch of people on a team coding on the same project. If you imagine 3 people coding on the same file, how does that work? Do you say, hey, other guys, don't touch this file. I'm working on it today. And when I hit save, then I'll call you back on the phone and you can start working on it. That's a terrible, terrible workflow. As you can imagine, that does not scale well to big teams and big companies. So what we have to do is we actually have to use version control. Version control is going to track what everybody does, and it's going to automatically merge all the changes together. It's going to be so much nicer. So you'll see when you learn how to use Git for version control, why people do it and why every serious professional company uses it. Super, super cool. A little bit of a learning curve. Give yourself a little bit of time. Don't rush it. Don't try to learn Git in a day, even though you can learn the basics of Git in an hour or two. Don't rush it. Get really comfortable with it. Give yourself a little bit of time. At this point, you are going to want to move on to intermediate CSS. Intermediate CSS is where you learn how to do things like, hey, I want one web page, but I want it to look different on mobile than on desktop. That's called media queries and responsive layouts. These allow you to have the same content display a little bit differently on different machines. Same thing with responsive images. If you're on a huge desktop machine, maybe you want to display this massive background image. And if you're on a mobile, maybe you just want to download a little bitty image to use less bandwidth and make the page load faster. So these are 2 responsive features that you're going to learn. And then you're going to use a NPM package called Sass to compile Sass code into CSS. What that means is you're going to write a language that's better than CSS. And then you're going to turn that language, that code you write in Sass, into CSS code, which will work on all the web pages. Browsers don't read Sass code. They read CSS code. But it's easier to write Sass code and then turn it into CSS code using an NPM package called Sass. If that confuses you, oh, it's not so bad. And then you're going to learn how to break your CSS code into different files. A 3,000 line CSS code is terrible to work with. It's so much easier to work with 10 or 15 files that are much smaller in terms of code. And so you're going to learn how to break this up and also use Sass to compile all those files down into one file. Now it's going to start feeling like you're a professional with your CSS handling. And then lastly, you want to learn CSS frameworks like Tailwind CSS or Bootstrap. These are kind of some things that many, many companies will use to manage their CSS, and they make life a lot more enjoyable in many, many circumstances. Then you're going to move on to intermediate JavaScript. Here's where you learn how to actually become a more serious programmer. You're going to learn a checklist of things that I won't go through because it'll probably just confuse you, but you're going to basically learn all these different things in JavaScript. Some people that are more creative and not as technical, you're going to lean more towards the 6-week mark of this. If you're highly technical and you love complex topics, then it'll be a lot easier for you. Either way, the complexity is not terrible. It really isn't terrible. But depending on how you're wired, if you're drawn more towards the design aspect of web development, this will take you probably a little longer. And if you're highly technical, mathematical, detailed, you might just latch onto this and catch it a little bit faster. So give yourself some time there depending on how you're wired. And then lastly, you're going to come over here to Code Quality Basics. These are some NPM packages that we run against our code to help us out. This right here will catch JavaScript errors before we ever run it in the browser. That's what ESLint does. Prettier can format our code whenever you hit save, and it can make sure that everybody's code on a whole team looks exactly the same and is formatted and spaced exactly the same. ESLint and Prettier are super awesome. TypeScript allows you to add some extra features to JavaScript that do not exist in JavaScript. All three of these are pretty stinking popular, and it'd be really good to at least know what they are, familiarize yourself with what they are, and then you're also going to want to learn here basic testing for your code. Testing is how you actually write programming to prove that your programming did what it should do. Let's say you had a math program that took A and B and returned A plus B. Well, then you could write a test and said, hey, if A is 1 and B is 2, then you should return 3. That way, if you accidentally ever make a change to your code and break what it should do, your test will say, hey, A plus B doesn't equal 3 anymore. What did you do wrong in your code? So that's basically what tests are. As you're writing your code, you're writing tests against your code to make sure that it does well as you make changes over time. It still does what you intended it to do. At this point, you also have a lot more options because you know Git and GitHub on how you can deploy your code to websites. You can use GitHub Pages, Netlify, or Vercel. Vercel is my favorite, although it's not necessarily the cheapest depending on how you do it. But there are some great ways if you know how to push your code to GitHub to deploy your website and really enjoy your life. Now you're done with 102. Lots of people, or maybe not lots of people, used to be you could get a job at this point. It's getting a little trickier to get a job at this point. So it's probably worth mentioning that you want to go to 103 before seriously pursuing a career. However, if you're in a large city like New York, Atlanta, LA, there's a decent chance that you could get a job with the 102 skill set. It just will be a little harder to find. You're going to have to find a company that has specific niches for 102 level developers. 102, by the way, is totally something I've made up. This is basically a benchmark you're looking for a complete skill set on how to build flat web pages very well. 101 is how you build flat pages fairly well. The advanced CSS and JavaScript you get in the 102 level allow you to build them very well, especially node packages, Git, all these things really give you a complete skill set around building flat web pages. So the 103 skill set is all about building web apps. You're going to learn how to use static site generators to build a huge application that is all flat content. And you're also going to learn how to use single page applications or build web applications. If you think about it, every social media website you use is not a flat web page, right? It's not the same every time you visit it, like maybe a company's business card style website would be. A web application is going to be different every time you visit it because it's going to pull in information from a database on the internet. It's going to show that to you. Like if you're thinking about using Twitter, as people are using it, you're getting notifications, you're seeing the likes go up, you're seeing new content appear on the page as people post. This is a web application, and you're going to learn how to build this now. You're going to learn how to use it with just JavaScript to make a really basic web application. And you're going to learn how routing works and how to use URLs to store where you were, what page you were at. And as soon as you learn this, you're going to realize this would be really frustrating to do without a package that helps me do a lot more. And that's why you're going to learn React. React is going to help you build web apps with JavaScript. It's going to give you a whole lot of structure and a whole lot of tools that allow you to do those crazy things I talked about without a whole lot of difficulty. It would just be very complex to do them by yourself without a framework. That's what React is called. It's a framework. It's a set of structure and rules that if you use that structure and use those tools and rules, you can get a whole lot done very quickly. So you're going to learn how to do a basic React application where you can fetch data from the internet and then post it in your page and maybe send data back off to the internet when the user does certain things like write posts or write to-dos in a to-do list. Then you're going to learn how to use CSS in React applications. It's still CSS, it's still Sass, it's everything you've been doing, but you're going to use it just a little bit differently inside of React. It doesn't take too long. You'll notice I put 1 to 2 weeks here as the timeline, but it is something that you want to give yourself a little bit of time aside to learn because there's some methodology that goes into it and there are several options you can use. Next up, you're going to learn some frameworks for React. I thought you said React was a framework. Yes, React is a framework for how you do things in JavaScript, but then there are also bigger things that help you organize your React code. And that sounds complex, but it's really not too bad. These things just make your life easier is what it is. If you're doing basic React, these two things will make your life better. Next.js is the one I would go for, although React Router is very popular and useful as well. If you're short on time, just learn React, learn Next.js, and move on with your life. And then you're also going to learn advanced state management. If you don't know React right now, then that word doesn't make any sense. But basically, you're just going to learn how to control the data of your application in an easy to reproduce and a reliable way. MobX is what I would use for that. It's very, very simple, very straightforward. You're going to like your life a lot with MobX. Redux is the most popular tool for doing this these days, but I don't really recommend it. I think it actually has a lot of weaknesses that frustrate people who use it. But that being said, if you're looking for a job, it'd be a good idea to at least familiarize yourself with how Redux works, because more than likely a company is going to use or have some Redux code still in their code base. So you're going to learn advanced state management, and that's pretty much it. At this point, you're ready to go look for a job. You have a rock solid skill set that lots of people are looking for hiring. And you can do a lot of things and provide a lot of value to your company. Same thing here, how to publish websites at this point doesn't really change, except for Vercel is awesome for deploying Next.js applications. Absolutely love it. It's the company that is the people that make Next.js, so it just works very, very well. If you stuck with me through this point, you're dedicated, you're in, you're going to love it. And you should probably subscribe and thumbs up if you have not subscribed to me yet, because I'm going to be adding a lot of these videos in, probably even at some point building full courses that teach all of this stuff for not too much money, because a boot camp would cost you about $18,000 to learn all this stuff. And I think people should be able to learn it for a lot less if they are driven and motivated people. So hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it helps you out in your web dev learning journey. Good luck to you. Go learn, go build great stuff, and have a good day.